The ice machine rattled like something inside was trying to breathe. At first I thought it was just the compressor kicking on. Machines in the station made all kinds of tired noises during the graveyard shift. The soda fountain hissed every few minutes like it was sighing. The refrigerators hummed in overlapping pitches that turned the air into a kind of mechanical lullaby. Even the coffee warmer ticked softly as it cooled. But the ice machine didn't sound tired. It sounded strained. I was alone behind the counter of the roadside gas station just past mile marker 42, the kind of place truckers stopped at when everything else along the highway had already gone dark. Midnight had passed hours ago. Outside, the parking lot lights buzzed with a sickly yellow glow, and the neon open sign in the window flickered like it had something to argue about with the darkness. Inside, the air smelled faintly metallic from the refrigeration units, and the ice machine kept rattling. Not constantly, not like a loose panel or a worn motor. It came in short bursts, irregular, the way someone breathes after running too far. Rattle. Pause. Rattle, rattle. Then silence. I stood behind the counter, listening to the refrigerator's hum along the back wall. The soda cooler's glass door reflected the aisle lights in a warped stripe that bent my reflection into something taller and thinner than I was. Rattle. The sound came again, sharper this time. The ice machine sat beside the soda fountain, a waist-high stainless steel box with a plastic chute for cups and a heavy lid on top for filling the storage bin. Condensation beaded along its edges and dripped steadily down to the tile. Rattle. It was quieter now, but longer, like something drawing air slowly through its teeth. I told myself the same thing anyone would. It was just ice shifting inside. Maybe the motor was icing over. Maybe the temperature control was stuck. But when I stepped closer, the air around the machine felt colder than the rest of the room. Not freezer cold, cave cold, the kind of cold that didn't belong to a machine. I lifted the lid. A soft fog of cold air spilled out across my hands. The bin was full of ice. Jagged cubes piled almost to the top, glistening in the fluorescent light. Nothing unusual about that, except the ice looked wrong. Not the cubes themselves. The way they sat together. Instead of a loose pile, they seemed packed tightly, as if they had melted slightly and fused again. Smooth ridges connected them like veins of clear glass. A thin sheen of water ran through the gaps and dripped slowly down into the drain. I reached in and picked up a piece. It felt softer than it should have. Not melting, just yielding, like it had been formed around something that had moved away. Behind me, the refrigerators hummed. Above me, the neon sign flickered. Inside the bin, something shifted. Not loudly, just a subtle settling sound, like a lung finishing an exhale. I froze with my hand still inside the machine. The rattling came again, but this time it didn't sound mechanical at all. It sounded wet. I pulled my hand out and closed the lid. The rattling stopped immediately. For a while, the station felt normal again. A truck passed on the highway, its tires whispering over the asphalt. The neon sign flickered its lazy rhythm. The soda machine gurgled faintly through its syrup lines. I tried to ignore the ice machine, but once you start noticing a sound like that, it never really disappears. Around 3 in the morning, the temperature inside the station dropped suddenly. It wasn't the air conditioner. I checked the thermostat behind the counter, still set to the same number as always. But a chill crept through the aisles anyway, cold enough that my breath started to show. The refrigeration units hummed louder, as if they were working harder to keep up with something leaking into the room. The ice machine rattled again. Longer this time. Rattle, rattle, rattle. Pause. Then a soft hollow sound, like air moving through a throat. I walked toward it without really deciding to. The floor tiles felt colder with each step. The soda cooler doors reflected the fluorescent lights in long warped streaks, bending the aisle behind me into shapes that didn't quite line up with the shelves. When I reached the ice machine, frost had begun forming along its edges. Not the powdery frost freezers get. This frost had patterns. Thin branching lines that spread outward like delicate ferns. Or lungs. I lifted the lid again. The ice inside had changed. The cubes had fused into a single uneven mass, smooth in some places and hollow in others. Small cavities had formed between them, dark pockets where meltwater gathered and froze again. Condensation dripped from the lid and landed with soft ticks. Then the ice moved. Not a shift, not a collapse, a slow inward draw. The entire surface sank slightly toward the center, as if the mass inside had pulled air through it. I heard the sound clearly then. A breath, long, strained. Then the ice rose again. Exhale. A faint mist drifted upward from the surface. I slammed the lid shut. The rattling began immediately. Not frantic, just steady now. Breathing. I backed away until my shoulders touched the refrigerator doors. In their curved glass reflection, the station looked deeper than it really was. The aisles stretched farther back, the lights receding in a crooked line that shouldn't have fit inside the building. The rattling continued. Every few seconds. Inhale. Exhale. The frost patterns on the machine thickened. The air grew colder. I told myself it had to be some kind of mechanical failure, some weird freezing cycle. But the pattern in the frost kept spreading outward, across the counter, across the soda fountain, across the floor tiles in pale branching veins. They all pointed back to the ice machine, as if the cold was flowing outward from it, as if the machine was inhaling the room and exhaling something else. Around 4 in the morning, the ice started melting. Not normally. It didn't collapse into water. It softened, sagged, then reformed again in new shapes. When I opened the lid a third time, the interior looked nothing like ice cubes anymore. The mass had hollow chambers now, curved surfaces. Thin, translucent membranes of frozen water stretched across gaps like skin over bone. The structure looked disturbingly familiar. Not a machine, not ice, a lung. I watched it contract. The ice tightened inward. Water beads slid along its surfaces like sweat. Then it expanded again with a soft cracking sound. Exhale. A ribbon of fog spilled out over the edge of the bin. The cold air carried a faint smell. Not chemical, not metallic. Something older, like damp stone in an underground place. I leaned closer without meaning to. Inside the lung-shaped ice, tiny cracks were spreading with each breath. Through them I saw darkness. Not the dark of shadow. Depth, as if the ice wasn't holding air, but space. And every time the machine exhaled, a thin stream of mist slipped through those cracks and into the station. The refrigerators hummed louder. The neon sign flickered faster. The frost patterns on the floor now reached the entrance door. I closed the lid slowly. The breathing didn't stop this time. It continued inside the machine. Steady, patient. I went behind the counter and looked up the machine's serial number on the maintenance sheet, taped inside the drawer. The station had been renovated 10 years ago. According to the paperwork, the ice machine was much older. It hadn't been installed during the renovation. It had been left here. No manufacturer listed. Just a note written in thick black marker. Do not remove. Unit provides cooling for building. That was all. The breathing continued. Inhale, exhale. And each time it exhaled, the air in the station grew colder. By dawn, the frost had reached the ceiling tiles. The refrigerators had stopped humming entirely. Their lights flickered weakly behind the glass. The ice machine rattled gently, breathing slower now, deeper, like something waking after a long sleep. I stood beside it, watching the frost patterns pulse with each breath, and I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The mist leaving the machine didn't disappear. It drifted slowly through the aisles, toward the door, toward the highway outside, spreading into the night air. The machine inhaled again. The lid lifted slightly on its hinges. Inside, the ice lung expanded wider than before. Cracks opened through the frozen membranes, revealing that same impossible depth beneath. The exhale came slowly. A long, pale breath rolled out across the floor. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I heard another sound carried inside it. A distant echo. Not wind, not machinery. Breathing, answering it. Somewhere out in the cold dark beyond the station. A woman asked if the night aisle was open yet. It was the kind of question that didn't belong in the quiet hour between 2 and 3 in the morning. The store was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights humming softly overhead like distant insects. A single row of bulbs along the back wall flickered every few seconds, dimming the freezer cases into alternating bands of white and gray. The refrigeration units breathed steadily, long mechanical sighs that rose and fell through the aisles. I was halfway through restocking a display of canned coffee when the woman stepped up to the counter. I hadn't heard the door chime. For a moment, I thought she might have been standing there the whole time. She wore a pale coat that looked damp around the shoulders, as if she'd walked through fog. Her hair hung straight and dark against her face, hiding most of her expression. The only thing clearly visible was her mouth. She was smiling politely. "Excuse me," she said. "Is the night aisle open yet?" I blinked. "The what?" "The night aisle," she repeated gently, like someone asking whether the bakery had fresh bread. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't think we have one." Her smile didn't change. "Oh, they usually open it by now." She glanced over her shoulder, peering down the rows of shelves. Our store wasn't large, 7 aisles, a short freezer corridor, and the back wall lined with cigarettes and lottery tickets. I'd worked the night shift here for almost a year. I knew every squeaky tile and crooked price tag. There was no night aisle. "I can check with the manager," I said automatically. "You are the manager tonight," she replied. Something in her tone made it sound less like a guess and more like a correction. The lights flickered again. For a moment the store dimmed so much the aisles looked deeper than they should, long shadows stretching between shelves like narrow tunnels. When the brightness returned, the woman was still smiling. "Well," she said, "if it isn't open yet, it will be soon." She turned and walked away from the counter. I watched her drift into aisle 4. Cereal. Her coat brushed the shelves as she passed, whispering softly against cardboard boxes. For a few minutes I stood there listening to the store breathe. The hum of refrigeration, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Somewhere deeper inside the building, something clicked, like a switch being flipped slowly back and forth. I told myself the woman was just confused. Maybe she meant the liquor store next door. Maybe there was another location nearby with some gimmicky late-night section. Still, after a while, curiosity nudged at me. I stepped out from behind the counter. The store felt colder away from the registers. The polished tile floor reflected the ceiling lights in dull streaks that stretched toward the back wall. Aisle 4 looked empty. The cereal boxes stood perfectly aligned, their glossy mascots grinning under the fluorescent glare. "Ma'am," I called. No answer. I walked halfway down the aisle. At the end, it opened into the freezer corridor. Glass doors gleamed with condensation, and the faint smell of frozen meat hung in the air. No woman. I frowned. There wasn't anywhere else she could have gone without passing me. Unless, I glanced left. Aisle 5. Snack foods. For a moment I was certain it hadn't been that long before. Our aisles were short, maybe 15 meters at most, but the shelves in aisle 5 seemed to stretch farther than usual, the rows of chips and crackers tapering into a dim point near the back wall. The flickering lights were worse here. Every few seconds the brightness dipped, leaving the shelves in a soft gray gloom. And somewhere between the flickers, I thought I heard whispering. Not words, just the faint rustle of packaging shifting against itself. I took a step into the aisle. The air smelled strange. Not spoiled, just unfamiliar, like cold plastic and dust. "Hello," I called again. The whispering stopped. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed something wrong with the shelves. The products weren't quite right. Most of them were ordinary. Bags of chips, candy bars, instant noodles. But here and there something else had appeared. A jar with a label I couldn't read, the letters warped and thin. A black can with no brand name, only a silver ring printed around its middle. A box that looked like cereal but showed no mascot, only a pale photograph of a hallway. I reached for the box. The moment my fingers touched it, the lights flickered violently. For an instant the aisle went dark. And in that darkness, I heard breathing. Not the mechanical sigh of the refrigerators, Something slower. Closer. Right behind me. The lights returned with a sharp buzz. The box in my hand was gone. The shelf held nothing but chips again. My throat felt dry. That was when I realized the aisle was longer than it should be. I could still see the front of the store behind me, the registers glowing softly in the distance, but the back wall was farther away than I remembered. The shelves stretched on and on. Another flicker. In the brief dimness, the shelves shifted slightly, not moving exactly, just settling into a new position, as if they had taken a slow step when I wasn't looking. My stomach tightened. I started walking toward the back wall. The floor tiles beneath my feet felt colder with every step. And the whispering came back. Soft, almost curious. Halfway down the aisle, I saw the woman again. She stood near the end, examining a shelf that hadn't been there before. It looked older than the rest of the store. Dark metal instead of white, its surface spotted with rust. Products filled its rows, but none of them had labels I recognized. Glass bottles filled with pale liquid. Boxes printed with dim photographs. One package looked disturbingly like a folded receipt sealed in plastic. "You found it," the woman said without turning. "I didn't. You did." Her voice was gentle. "This is the night aisle." I swallowed. "This aisle isn't supposed to be here." "It isn't," she agreed. She turned to face me. Up close, I could see something wrong with her reflection in the freezer door behind her. It lagged slightly, moving a fraction of a second later than she did. "The night aisle opens when the store forgets what it's supposed to be," she said. "What does that mean?" "It happens after a certain hour, when the lights flicker enough, when the shelves shift without anyone noticing." She picked up one of the unlabeled cans. "Most people never see it. Then why can I?" Her smile widened slightly. "Because you were looking." The lights flickered again. This time they stayed dim. In the weak glow, the aisle seemed to deepen further, stretching into a corridor of endless shelves. The whispering grew louder. It sounded almost like voices now. "You should go back to the counter," I said, trying to steady my voice. She tilted her head. "You can leave if you want." The way she said it made my chest tighten. "As long as you stop looking." Behind her, the shelves shifted again. One of them slid silently aside, revealing a narrow passage that hadn't existed a moment before. Darkness waited inside. The woman stepped toward it. "This part isn't for customers," she said. "Wait." She paused. "Is the night aisle real?" She thought for a moment. "It's real the way midnight is real," she said. Or silence between two breaths. The passage behind her seemed to inhale slowly, the darkness expanding like lungs. I could feel the store changing around us. The refrigeration hum had slowed. The lights flickered in a rhythm that sounded almost deliberate. "Where does it go?" I asked. Her reflection smiled before she did. "Deeper into the store." She stepped backward into the dark. For a moment her coat was the last visible thing, pale against the shifting shelves. Then she was gone. The passage closed quietly. The shelves slid back into place. And the aisle was normal again. Short, ordinary, filled with chips and candy bars. I walked slowly back to the counter. The store looked exactly the way it always did. 7 aisles. Freezers humming softly. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But something felt wrong. When I glanced toward aisle 5, it seemed slightly longer than the others. Just a little. The flickering light above it blinked once, twice, then steadied. I stood there for a long time listening to the store breathe. Eventually the automatic doors opened with a soft chime. A man stepped inside, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He wandered up to the counter. "Hey," he said. "Quick question." My stomach tightened. "Yeah." He glanced down the aisles, then back at me. "Is the night aisle open yet?" Behind him, somewhere deep in the store, a shelf moved quietly when neither of us were looking.